In 1661, Nicolas Fouquet, then French Minister of Finance, organized a celebration of unprecedented opulence. 17,000 guests were invited to the celebration, and the same fireworks masters who would later create the grandeur of Versailles oversaw the fireworks displays. The feast was so extravagant that the young King Louis XIV, then barely 22 years old, was stunned. The monarch realized that his own subordinate was living in greater prosperity than he. 3 weeks later, the musketeers took Fouquet into custody. He spent the remaining 19 years of his life imprisoned within the fortress, where he died. A century later, on the other side of the Atlantic, Robert Morris, once considered the richest man in America and a personal sponsor of the Revolutionary War, ended his days in poverty. He died in a cheap boarding house, forgotten by everyone in the country he had played a key role in creating. These individuals weren't fools, gamblers, or losers. On the contrary, they possessed brilliant minds, colossal influence, and connections. The problem was that they never recognized the existence of three invisible thresholds in the process of capital accumulation. Crossing each of them completely changes the rules of the game. Most people don't notice these boundaries, which leaves them forever stuck, wondering why the financial mathematics don't work in their favor. My name is Jack, and I spend a significant amount of time studying the psychology of wealth, the mathematics of compound interest, and the transformations that occur when certain financial milestones are reached. If you feel like your savings efforts aren't making any real progress, this information will be incredibly helpful. By the end of this article, you'll understand the precise mathematical and psychological tipping points that separate those who build lasting wealth from those who waste their lives. I'll demonstrate why the financial industry isn't interested in educating you about these milestones, why employers benefit from your ignorance, and how understanding three specific numbers will fundamentally change the way you perceive every dollar you earn. Let's begin by turning to the Italian Renaissance. Events that took place in Florence 600 years ago explain the reasons for your current stagnation and why conventional money management advice may be misguided. In 1434, Florence was a city of about 60,000 people, comparable to today's Flagstaff, Arizona. Despite its modest size, the city-state generated more wealth than kingdoms 10 times its size. The Medici family wasn't wealthy to begin with. They were wool merchants and belonged to the typical middle class of their time. Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici founded a modest banking enterprise with nothing remarkable about it. It was hard to imagine that his descendants would become popes, queens, and shape the destinies of nations. However, his son Cosimo noticed a pattern that changed everything. This observation is more valuable than any investment advice. Cosimo realized that there's a certain level of capital beyond which money ceases to obey the usual laws. Below this threshold, finances become defensive. You protect them, hoard them, and fear losing them. Every florin matters, and any unexpected expense is perceived as a catastrophe. Your mind is focused on surviving the month or year. But beyond a certain point, a strange metamorphosis occurs. You gain the right to make mistakes without risking your life. You can take risks that would destroy a small fortune but only slightly affect a large one. You can refuse dubious offers because the need for them disappears. Florence's small bankers were forced to accept any work that came through their doors. They couldn't afford to be selective. Even a bad loan had to be made for the sake of interest payments. Any risky venture became mandatory, as refusal meant falling behind competitors. They were trapped in their own vulnerability. Cosimo, however, could afford to wait. He outsourced desperate deals to rivals, biding his time. He was interested in merchants with insured ships, nobles with unencumbered lands, and businesses offering colossal profits with limited risks. He calculated that possessing capital sufficient to survive 3 years of complete business collapse elevates the owner to a completely different category. It's important to understand that this advantage didn't grow linearly. There was a specific point of transformation. It was like the transition from checkers to chess. The board is the same, but the strategy is different. Cosimo identified 3 thresholds. He called the first the breathing line, the point where savings are sufficient to overcome setbacks without panic. The second was the multiplication line, when money works so hard that its growth outpaces basic needs. The third threshold was the immortality line, where wealth outlives its owner and continues to grow for future generations. The Medici overcame all three stages. By 1513, they controlled more wealth than most European countries combined. They transcended the normal relationship between man and money. Meanwhile, families with similar starting points in 1434 disappeared within a couple of generations. This happened not because of robberies or wars, but because of a failure to understand these thresholds. They made stage I decisions while still in stage 2, or behaved as if they were in stage 3 while barely holding on to stage 2. The failure to adapt their mental models to changing circumstances was their undoing. These same 3 points exist in the modern economy. The principles have remained unchanged since the time of Cosimo. Financial advisors don't mention them because it doesn't fit into their product sales pitch. Banks don't benefit from you reaching these points, because then you'll no longer need their services. The media perpetuates anxiety and confusion, so you seek refuge in new stock tips. The first major milestone in today's reality is reaching $100,000 in investable assets. This isn't about your total assets, including a car or furniture, or the equity in your home. It's precisely $100,000 invested in the market and working for you. Below this point, compound interest seems like a fiction. While the mathematical formula works for any amount, the psychological and practical effects aren't felt until this threshold is reached. This is precisely why many people give up halfway through. Let's look at the numbers. With $10,000 at 8% annual interest, you earn $800 a year. That's about $66 a month. This amount doesn't change your lifestyle and barely covers small bills. At the end of the month, the account balance looks almost unchanged. You don't feel richer and you don't change your behavior. Compound interest works, but it's invisible. With $50,000, the income would be $4,000 a year, or $330 a month. That's better, but market fluctuations can easily wipe out several months' gains. The feeling of fragility lingers. However, once you reach $100,000, that same 8% becomes $8,000 annually. That's $666 in monthly growth. Now the results become tangible. Even if the market declines, you understand that the system will recover. Money takes on a dynamic of its own. The psychological shift is more important than the mathematical one. When investment income becomes a significant part of your salary, your attitude toward work changes. If your annual salary is $70,000, then $8,000 from investments is more than 11% of income generated by capital, not your time. The handcuffs on your hands become looser, despair recedes. You begin to negotiate salary more confidently, you can leave a toxic team, or choose a more promising role. The journey to your first 100,000 is the most grueling stage. It can take 7 to 10 years of disciplined savings on an average income. It's a slow and tedious process, devoid of the glitz of social media stories. If you invest $500 monthly, your $6,000 will only yield about $300 in profit in the first year. The effort seems pointless, and this is where 90% of people give up, preferring to spend the money on a vacation or a new car. But it's important to realize, the transition from $100,000 to $200,000 takes about half as long. Not because of a sharp increase in income, but because your capital begins to significantly contribute to its own growth. $8,000 of automatic annual growth are added to your savings. The snowball begins to roll on its own. Up to the first threshold, you push the boulder uphill. After that, it begins to move under its own weight. It's like filling a swimming pool with a hose. At first, you only see a puddle that appears to be a leak, but over time, the water level begins to rise before your eyes. Those who create real wealth are those who survive the puddle phase. The second milestone is $500,000 in investment assets. This mark separates the merely wealthy from the truly financially secure. With a conservative approach and 4% annual interest, this amount generates $20,000 in passive income. It's not enough for luxury, but it's enough to cover basic needs, housing, food, and transportation. The main value here isn't the money, but the elimination of fear. With $500,000, you're effectively protected from unemployment. Getting laid off ceases to be a disaster. You can afford to spend a year looking for a suitable position or change your profession. You gain the power to leave. Many stay in jobs they hate out of fear of missing a few paychecks. Employers are aware of this vulnerability and can indulge in unfairness. But having $500,000 in the bank changes the rules. You become more valuable as an employee because you operate from a position of strength and options. With an 8% return, such a portfolio earns $40,000 a year, which often exceeds your personal annual savings. Money becomes your most productive employee, the one who never gets sick or requires vacation. For many, a sum of $500,000 seems like an unattainable fantasy. But remember the acceleration effect. If it took 10 years to reach the first 100, then the next 400,000 will take another 10 or 15 years with the same effort. Time will pass anyway, the only question is how you'll achieve it. In 2008, many who accumulated such sums made a mistake: they didn't change their mindset. When the market crashed, they panicked and sold their assets, turning temporary paper losses into real ruin. To succeed in the second stage, you need to deeply understand that market noise shouldn't affect your security. The third and final milestone is $2,500,000. At this level, the inversion point occurs. At a conservative return of 6%, this capital brings in $150,000 per year. For most, this is significantly more than their working income. Your money now produces more resources than you can create with your time. At this point, time ceases to be your primary asset for exchange for currency. Below this threshold, trading time is justified. But above this threshold, every hour spent on hired labor becomes an inefficient use of resources. Rich people behave differently not out of laziness, but out of mathematical logic. Working 60 hours a week for a $20,000 raise makes sense with a small capital. But with $2.5 million, those same 60 hours represent lost profits from strategic decisions. A portfolio earns about $400 a day, including holidays. Working for $300 a day in this case is an economically unprofitable proposition. Reaching the third milestone with just your salary is extremely difficult. Standard advice to save 15% of your income is designed to reach the second milestone by retirement age. Passing the inversion point requires ownership, a stake in a successful business, real estate, stock options, or shares in fast-growing companies. The financial system is designed to keep you from achieving these things. Banks profit from your debt, and credit card companies profit from the interest on your cards. Employers profit from your sense of dependency. They can limit salary increases, knowing you have no alternatives. None of them want you to achieve freedom. You're forced to focus on your salary, not your net worth. Someone with an income of $150,000 and expenses of $140,000 is weaker than someone with an income of $70,000 and expenses of $50,000. You're being pushed toward consumption through new car models, larger homes, and subscriptions. These are carefully engineered traps designed to absorb your income. To escape, you need to clearly define your current situation. Add up all your liquid investment assets, excluding the value of your personal home and property. If you're below the $100,000 mark, your only goal is to reach it as quickly as possible. Cut expenses, find additional sources of income, and automate your savings. At this stage, complex strategies aren't important, the only thing that matters is the amount you've saved. Between $100,000 and $500,000, the focus shifts to protection. Create a reserve fund for 6 months of actual expenses and diversify your investments. Start thinking about what will give you the right to refuse a career decision. Between $500,000 and $2.5 million, it's time to transition to owning assets with high growth potential. This is the time to start a business, invest in real estate, or acquire stakes in companies. Salary alone rarely helps here. If you've exceeded $2.5 million, be vigilant. This is often the point at which people make fatal mistakes, chasing exotic risks for quick gains. Your goal is to protect your gains and manage your funds wisely. The history of the Medici teaches us, those who fail to update their mental models when crossing thresholds are doomed to extinction. Nicolas Fouquet failed to understand that wealth should not threaten those who wield political power. Robert Morris destroyed himself through excessive speculation, losing touch with reality during the inversion phase. 3 milestones, 100,000, 500,000, and 2,500,000 represent shifting points in the physics of money. Now that you see the game map, you can plan your actions. You can overcome the difficult initial stage, build a fortress of security, and reach a point where capital works more efficiently than a person. You have information that most people lack. The only question is how you use it. If these thoughts have changed your view of finances, determine which milestone you're currently aiming for.